Morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to everybody joining today's webinar about the power of UX, practical tips for Google's Core Web Vitals update. My name is Adrian, and I'm Director of Performance Marketing at Web Republic. I will be your MC today and guide you through today's session. Just a few administrative notes at the beginning. We will record today's sessions, so please press continue if this is okay for you. If not, please leave the session now. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be able to answer questions during the presentations, but we have scheduled a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the session. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, and please add your questions there so that we can pick them up later. We will also send the recording to all registered participants of the webinar afterwards. If you have any further questions, please feel free to send an email to communications@webrepublic.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. The Core Web Vitals update, a big topic. Last year, Google announced that it will introduce the page experience as a new ranking factor in organic search. And earlier this year, Google communicated that the rollout will officially start from mid-June and will fully count as a ranking factor by the end of August. However, the announcement by Google did not come as a surprise. Over the last few years, Google has already increasingly focused on the user part of the further development of the ranking algorithm. As with previous updates, the overall goal behind this update is to make websites more user-friendly and faster. With the Core Web Vitals update, Google is reweighting the individual user experience on the web. And as part of this important update, 3 new metrics will be introduced as the Core Web Vitals: LCP, largest contentful paint, FID, first input delay, and CLS, cumulative layout shift. But what exactly do these, let's say, cryptic metrics stand for and how they are being measured? Are other ranking factors less important in this context? And what are the implications on SEO and the website performance? And what should companies do now to be well positioned with regards to this update? It is precisely these core topics that we are addressing in this webinar today, and we also show why it is necessary to start optimizing your website for the upcoming update now. This basically brings me to today's agenda. We will have 3 topics covered by our speakers. First, we will do a classification of why the Core Web Vitals are so important to a website performance. Second, we will give you some hands-on recommendations on how you can prepare for the upcoming changes. And third, we will look at the Core Web Vitals, how they combine UX and SEO. And now I would like you to introduce to our speakers. Today on stage, we have Susanne, Dafina, and Martin. While Susanne Thompson joins us today from Seattle, Dafina and Martin are based in Zurich and work for Web Republic. And now I would like to introduce you to Susanne Thompson. Susanne is Google's mobile web ecosystem lead for Central Europe and a conversion specialist at Google DACH. She's been at Google for 3 years now and helps agency and tech partners guide their clients to transformational growth through digital conversation excellence strategies, both in the browser-based web and also in native apps. Prior to joining Google, Susanne was on the client side leading brands at Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, and Clorox. And there's also a fun fact about Susan. Susan sat next to Amazon's Jeff Bezos in several classes during college when she was just a regular nerd like the rest of us today. And she still sees him often in the Buffett line at her college reunions. And I'm very happy that Susanne is with us today. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to you, Susanne. The stage is yours.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be joining you guys today. So without further ado, I think that most of us have been sitting at home, working from home for about a year now. By the way, normally home for me is Hamburg, Germany. So this being in Seattle thing is only a work from home like temporary situation. But in any event, so it's not so surprising to most of us, I think, that in a global survey, 47% of respondents said that they're spending more time on their laptop computer since this pandemic started. And 33% of respondents are saying they're spending more time on PC or desktop. What is surprising, though, is that 70% of respondents say that during this pandemic time, even when we're working from home, even when we're literally sitting in front of our laptops or desktops constantly, 70% of us are spending more time on their mobile phone. So even in this like odd environment, mobile has become even more important than it already was before. Why does this matter to you in your business? Well, even before the pandemic, so these stats are from before the pandemic started, most of you, and frankly, most clients I see like from the Google side, get at least 40% more of their traffic on their website from a mobile device than from a desktop device. Let me put that another way. It is unusual for me to see any situation, any business, any client that isn't getting at least 65% of its traffic on a mobile device. And lately, we're actually seeing more like many websites are getting 80% of their traffic from a mobile device as opposed to a desktop device, or frequently that number is even 4 to 1. At the same time, and this is not a new trend, mobile is seeing lower conversions. So mobile has about half as many conversions as desktop. And so when you combine these two trends, and again, they're not stopping, even in this pandemic, it's gotten even more mobile. When you combine more and more people are choosing to interact with you on mobile, but conversions are lower on mobile, it has a net effect of not so good implications for the ROI of both your marketing and your campaigns. And so let's take a look at what's driving those lower conversions. And specifically, what's behind those lower conversion numbers, usually in our research and in our experience, is poor mobile user experience. And so this is a very important topic, and a topic that should matter to you and your business. And so at Google, we've spent quite a bit of time, both in the past and increasingly, taking a look at user experience. What defines a great user experience? What constitutes a poor user experience? How do you define that? And how do you quantify that? And we're constantly looking at better ways of measuring that. So we've been looking at ways to make it easier for developers to focus on user experiences and user experiences that matter, and also to make the web a better place for users, for advertisers, and frankly, for all of us. So that's basically what got us to Core Web Vitals. But before we go into kind of the details of Core Web Vitals, I want to take a little detour for a second. And specifically, I want to take a look at real user metrics, or what we call field data and lab data. What are the differences, and why does this matter? Like, why am I bothering to take this detour? Well, lab data, which is synthetically collected in a testing environment, or in other words, simulated, is critical for tracking down bugs and diagnosing issues because it's reproducible and has an immediate feedback loop. Field data, on the other hand, allows you to understand what your real world users are experiencing, conditions that are impossible to simulate in the lab. The real world, as you all know, is messy, with all kinds of permutations of devices, network configurations, cache conditions, the list goes on. Either set of metrics taken in isolation aren't nearly as powerful as when they're combined. User experience is based on, well, user experience is based on, well, real users and their experiences, recorded from real users on their real devices. So in figuring out whether your site's performance is good or bad, we look at what your real users are experiencing. Every time one of your users loads your page, it adds a single data point to this set of real user data. Because of this, a single field metric represents all of your users. Thousands of data points, variable cache conditions, network and device environments. The real world data presents you with all sorts of variables and unknowns. When you're trying to optimize based on data that represents so many device conditions, it's difficult to know where to start. This is why synthetic or lab testing is so useful. When you run Lighthouse on your page and get the results, it's a single data point collected real time for you, calibrated to represent a user in your upper percentiles. What this allows you to do is use a single set of values as representative of your user's experience on your page so that you can deep dive and debug against that. And that's why, again, as I said earlier, the strongest information for you, or basically the best information you can have, is using a combination of lab data where you can kind of do the work, debug, test and all, and field data where you can basically see success in the field, meaning with your real users. So when we were taking a look most recently at what are the metrics that we should be looking at and using, we were basically looking for metrics that apply to all web pages, that are measurable in the field and basically form the source of truth of what real users see, and that are most critical to user outcomes. So really focusing on a small number of metrics, those that make the most difference. And that's why last year, so a year ago, in May of 2020, at Google I/O, which typically takes place every May, just like it did this year, we introduced Core Web Vitals. So those are 3 metrics. We consider them the 3 most important metrics that basically tell you what, like, or tell our cues to the user. Is it happening? Like, is the thing going to load? Which is largest contentful paint, or LCP, is the measure of happeningness or loading speed. Secondly, a measure of, hey, is it responsive? That measure is called first input delay, FID. And is it stable, or is it visually stable? Like, does it jump around? Which is cumulative layout shift. And then, as Adrian said, we announced last November that we're actually going to now, as a next step, take these Core Web Vitals that we introduced in May of 2020 and make them a ranking factor. So they're not the only ranking factor, as you can see here. There's other indicators of search signals for page experience too, but these are 3 key ones. And these 3 together, LCP, FID, and CLS, those 3 form what we call Core Web Vitals. So again, as Adrian mentioned, while we had originally announced that this was going to take effect in May of 2021, in mid-April, we announced that there's actually been a slight delay. So we're going to start rolling this out beginning in June of 2021, and then gradually phase it in so that it'll be in full effect by the end of August. That's in part so it isn't such a jarring, a sudden change. We're like trying to do kind of a soft rollout. So what does this mean for you? It means that you really have a little bit of time here to focus on getting your Core Web Vitals in good shape. So now is the time to act. Now, we did a study in March of 2021 to see, like, where are people now? Where are websites now, particularly in DACH is what we focused on. And we saw that while some of you are ready, specifically 32% of German websites, 31% of Swiss websites, and 29% of Austrian websites are currently in good shape on Core Web Vitals. And here's some examples below of businesses that are in particularly good shape. It does mean most of you, or 2/3 of you, are not. And that's basically why we wanted to talk to you today.
Thank you very much, Susanne, for these exciting insights. And I would like now to move on to our next speakers and briefly introduce you to Dafina and Martin from Web Republic. Dafina is Web Republic's team manager UX, and together with Martin, she has developed a UX strategy for Web Republic and their clients to support them better in organizing the customer journey on their digital platforms. Before joining Web Republic, Dafina has worked for several years in the field of digital experience and digital transformation. There's also a fun fact about Dafina. Her go-to comfort binge TV show is The Office, as she likes the bizarre characters. And Martin is working as a team manager SEO at Web Republic and has optimized numerous websites ever since. With his knowledge in search engine optimization and user experience, Martin's goal is to increasingly combine the two disciplines, UX and SEO. This is the ideal way to benefit from the synergies and to make the most of website optimization. About this topic, Martin has already talked before at the DigiNet event when the Core Web Vitals had been announced for the first time. And Martin's fun fact, during summer times, you will find him very often weeding at the nearby farm during after work hours in order to get his portion of veggies. I'm really, really happy to have Martin and Dafina on stage today, and I would like to hand over to you guys. Take it over.
Thank you, Adi, for the introduction, and thank you, Susanne, for the valuable inputs regarding the Core Web Vitals and its primarily impact. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into the three main pillars. On the next slides, we will give you insights on common pitfalls and solutions. We will start with the largest contentful paint, so short LCP. LCP, on the next slide, please. LCP measures load speed and traces the point in the page load timeline when the main page content is likely to load. So what does that actually mean? To provide a good user experience, sites should strive to have a largest contentful point of 2 seconds or less. Largest contentful point paint is an important user-centric measures for measuring perceived load speed, because it marks the point in the page load timeline when the page's main content has likely loaded. That means that a fast LCP helps reassure the users that the page is useful. So this is very important, of course. In the following example, we see here mainly that the longer it takes a browser to receive content from the server, the longer it takes to render anything on the screen. A faster server response time directly improves every single page load metric, including the LCP. So let's see what the most common pitfalls regarding the LCP metrics are.
So common pitfalls that we see in terms of largest contentful paint are in general slow resource load times. So what does that mean? For example, we have images that are too large and not well compressed, or we have bloated JavaScript files that could be minified as well. The time it takes to load elements such as images or videos, if rendered above the fold, will have a direct effect on LCP. There are a few ways to ensure these files are loaded as fast as possible. So for example, optimize and compress images, preload important resources, compress text files, or minify JavaScript and CSS files. If we go one step further, we see an image in different sizes. However, the quality of the image remains mostly the same. And this is achieved by switching common image formats to a more contemporary one, such as WebP or even AVIF. AVIF generally has a better compression than WebP, PNG, JPEG, or a GIF, and is designed to supersede them. However, please be aware that AVIF is not yet available for all browsers and would need a special enabling for Firefox, as for example. But already switching to WebP will work very well. And here is some bad and some good news. And one always starts with the bad news, right? So the bad news is we see that too large images or the wrong way of using lazy loading are one of the biggest problems out there concerning site speed. We have seen that over and over again, actually. But as I've told you, there is also some good news. Image compression and using the right format is one of the few ways where you will not need any developer resources unless you automate that as well. So for everyone who is not a developer in here, you might be able to make up resources and readjust the workflow of uploading your images on your website. Another point I had just been talking about revolved around the bloated JavaScript. So here you can go ahead and minify those JavaScript files. What we also often see, especially with big corporate sites, is the loading of a main JavaScript or CSS file, of which only maybe 20 to 30% is actually needed. So get rid of what you don't need right away. And this takes us to the next pitfall, namely render blocking JavaScript and CSS. Before a browser can render any content, it needs to parse HTML markup into a DOM tree. So the HTML parser will pause if it encounters any external style sheets or synchronous JavaScript tags. Scripts and style sheets are both render blocking resources, which delay FCP and consequently also LCP. So defer any non-critical JavaScript and CSS to speed up loading of the main content of your web page. Ideally, you inline only the critical files. Now we'll jump right into the last pitfall, slow server response times. The longer it takes a browser to receive content from the server, the longer it takes to render anything on the screen. A faster server response time directly improves every single page load metric, including LCP. So before anything else, improve how and where your server handles your content. You can optimize your server response times in several ways. For example, route users to a nearby CDN, a content delivery network, cache assets, or establish third-party connections early. Now, this was already quite technical, so for those who might have lost me along the way, as a quick recap for LCP, start with optimizing JavaScript and CSS files. Get rid of unused code snippets and do not block the rendering path. Concerning images, compress them as much as possible without losing quality and consider switching to a contemporary format such as WebP or even AVIF. Next up, first input delay.
Well, we have heard a lot right now, but let's dig into the first input delay. It measures responsiveness and measures user experience delay when trying to interact with a page first. So pages should have an FID of under 100 milliseconds to provide a good user experience. To ensure that you meet this target for most users, the 75% of mobile and desktop loads is a good threshold to measure. So as we see, the FID is the user's first impression of the response time of your site. And we all know first impressions are critical in forming our overall impression of the quality and reliability of a website. Looking at this example, we see that FID measures the response of a page during loading. As such, it focuses exclusively on inputs events with specific behaviors, as you see here, such as clicks, touches, key presses. Other interaction, such as scrolling and zooming, are constant actions with entirely different performance restrictions. Also here, let's have a look about the common pitfalls and its calculation value. Hand over to Martin.
Thanks, Dafina. So if we look at the calculation of these values, we can see 3 steps. First, the browser has to process JavaScript and CSS. Second, we have the issue of single tasking, namely the main thread can only handle one task at a time. I don't know about you, but I pretty much work the same, and multitasking is not my thing. So if I already process something, I cannot handle another interactivity. And there we are right at the 3rd step. So if the main thread is processing the JavaScript and CSS, it cannot process a user interactivity such as a click on a button at the same time. So ideally, such an interactivity can be done within 100 milliseconds. Common pitfalls that we see when looking at first input delay can be heavy main thread execution and code that is neither deferred nor removed. Again, in other words, the browser cannot respond to most user input while it's executing JavaScript on the main thread. So the browser can't respond to user interactions while the main thread is busy. To improve this, reduce JavaScript's execution time. Then limiting the amount of JavaScript on your page reduces the amount of time that the browser needs to spend executing JavaScript code. So this speeds up how fast the browser can begin to respond to any user interactions. Minimize the main thread work, for example, by breaking up long tasks. So if you've already attempted to reduce the amount of JavaScript that loads on a single page, it can be useful to break down long-running code into smaller asynchronous tasks. If we talk about the pitfall of deferrable or removable code, it basically goes back to similar solutions that we also had for LCP, meaning you remove unnecessary JavaScript code that could also include duplicate modules. And this is also the first synergy you can look out for, actually. We will bring them together in the end, again, to give you the overview. Another point would be considering lazy loading for some third-party resources. As a recap for the first input delay, make sure that you keep your site structure simple, so avoid complex JavaScript and CSS files. And you can use asynchronous JavaScript, and ideally, please split up big files into smaller chunks.
Good. Let's look at the last one before we dig deeper into the what you can do actually. So cumulative layout shift, CLS measures visual stability and measures the amount of unexpected page content layout shifts. To have a good user experience, also here, pages should maintain a CLS below 0.1. But what exactly is CLS? Let's try to understand. Layout shift happens whenever a visible entity changes its starting position. For example, top and left position in the default writing mode between 2 frames, such as element are considered unstable. There is an element in the image here that takes half of the view in 1 frame. On the right-hand side, we have the element shift by 25% of the viewport height. The red rectangle indicates the union of the visible area of the element in both frames, which in this case is 75% of the entire viewport. Its impact fraction is 0.75. So the browser looks at the viewport size and movement of unstable elements between 2 rendered frames to calculate the layout shift score. So the layout shift score is a product of 2 movement measures, impact fraction and distance fraction. How we can make sure to avoid CLS? Let's see here on this slide.
So here again, in summary of the calculation of value, what Dafina has just explained, the calculation starts out with the impact fraction, so to speak. This is about the percentage of the viewport that is affected by the moving element. and then the distance fraction is calculated by what percentage the element moves. And this results in the final value, which gets multiplied and summed up. Common pitfalls to look out for is anything that has to do with shift triggering anti-patterns. So in other words, anything that triggers a layout shift should be avoided. If we go one slide before, we can see the most common causes of a poor CLS are images and video elements without dimensions. Then we often see ads, embeds, and iframes without dimensions. Ads are one of the largest contributors to layout shifts on the web. And I know ad networks and publishers often support dynamic ad sizes. And yes, ad sizes increase performance and revenue due to higher click rates and more ads competing in the auction. But unfortunately, this can lead to a suboptimal user experience due to ads pushing visible content you're viewing down the page. But of course, there is also a solution to this problem: handle dynamically injected content the right way. Image and video elements have explicit width and height attributes and save enough space for dynamically injected content. In a quick summary, avoid inserting new content above existing content unless in response to user interaction, and ensure any layout shifts that could occur are expected. So let me jump to the key takeaways regarding the solutions for better Core Web Vitals scores. We have summarized the actionable into 2 points, kind of. So one has to do with anything concerning rendering path and keeping a simple site structure. So if you focus here on the red dots, check out your site structure and keep it simple, remove unused JavaScript or CSS codes, and load JavaScript files asynchronously to not block the rendering path. If necessary, also inline critical JavaScript files. Now, focusing on the white dots, this point has to do with anything concerning images and video elements, as well as saving space for expected content. So compress images and use contemporary image formats such as WebP, specify height and width attributes for your images, and save space for dynamically loaded content. By bringing them all together now, we can see that if optimizing for one Core Web Vital, it can also have a positive impact on another one, and altogether the website becomes faster and more user-friendly. And now that you've heard about common pitfalls and the theoretical actionables, the most common ones, we will show how to find out what the status quo of your website is and where you will have to start.
Great. As Martin already said, in the following slides, we will give you some advice on how you can get started if you haven't done so yet, and show you how the Core Web Vitals correlate with the key business metrics by giving you also some examples of companies that already have seen some positive impact for their users. Well, the most important thing is you can do right now is really start measuring your site by looking at different metrics. And over to Mark.
There are a lot of field and lab tools available, actually. We have picked out 4 of them to show you how you can use them and where you can start out optimizing your Core Web Vitals. All these tools have in common that they use field data, and they specifically include the measurement of the 3 Core Web Vitals. So starting out with the Google Search Console, within the Google Search Console, you can find the Core Web Vitals report. Just click on it in order to get the first overview. In there, you will see how your site is doing, which of your URLs don't fulfill the metrics at all, and the ones which will have to be optimized further. If you open the report for mobile or desktop, you can find a detailed list of all the URLs mentioning which Core Web Vitals is concerned. And just like that, you will have a first good overview of the status quo of your site. Next up, you should consider the PageSpeed Insights test by Google. In there, you will find lab and field data combined. And pro tip from our side, the blue ribbon indicates measurement of Core Web Vitals. So in here, you will also find the overview of how a specific landing page is performing with direct suggestions on where to start optimizing. And another tip, check out different kinds of URLs in order to get the overview of all your page types. So for example, start with the home page, and if you are an e-commerce site, use this test also for a category page, maybe a product page, product listing page, and a product detail page. And if you also have an inspiration part with blog articles, also provide one of those. And next in line would be the WebDev measurement test. So here you can use it for any landing page, and it will directly indicate how you're doing with the Core Web Vitals concerning a specific page. More importantly, it gives you also a clear overview of impact concerning the optimizations. So here you can further prioritize your measurements. And then last but not least, start to measure, of course. So use the Chrome User Experience Report in order to see how your website is doing when you start optimizing. Also importantly, once you have collected the data, this can give you a good idea on how to prioritize your optimizations further. As said before, there are more tools available, but we believe with those 4 tests, you already get a good head start with optimizing your website for an ideal page speed. Farfetch is also a good example on how they chose on first measuring the business impact. So they are a big e-commerce shop for luxury fashion. And before investing in the Core Web Vitals, Farfetch wanted to see how it would impact their business in terms of exit and conversion rate. So they captured the Core Web Vital metrics across millions of sessions and over an extended period of time. What they found is that LCP showed a strong impact on both exit and conversion rates. FID showed some patterns of correlation of the exit rate as well. So to make sure that they convince their stakeholder within the company, they even built a business calculator for company-wide use. So no matter whether their role revolved around product management or marketing, they could estimate the business impact of optimizing Core Web Vitals upfront. More information about this case study can be found on Google's WebDev platform. And Dafina will talk in the next steps about convincing your stakeholders in more detail.
Yes, we already have seen how important it is to take your stakeholders with you, because we already know that different stakeholders in an organization, they also have different priorities. But we believe that Core Web Vitals can bring them all on the same page by focusing on optimizing user-centric metrics and the resulting business growth. For product managers, for example, performance should be an important criteria that defines the quality and success of new product features. And product excellence and working on interesting challenges improves developer satisfaction as well. Why not? So educate your stakeholders about the importance of adopting Core Web Vitals to improve the user experience and its coloration. Most of the time, we tend only to see what's on the surface and tend to forget what's beneath the iceberg. So focus in, for example, on search engine optimization and UX disciplines together, you can really look on what you can optimize on your website or on your mobile website. So this is very important that you, for example, combine those disciplines together, because we all know both share a common goal. They want to give users the best experience. So looking at those stats here that we brought with you, that those shows that it's not only important that you bring those disciplines together, but they also show impact on your business. So for example, the first 5 seconds on a page load time have the highest impact on conversion rate. Or as we already have heard a lot, images are an issue. And by just only compressing images, you have 25% of page, and you have a better page load time. So going on the next point, I will focus on the third before we go to the wrap up. And we want to give you some possible ways to go also here. So it is important that you deliver successful implementation using the following tips on the next slide. First of all, what I would suggest you to do is you should start prioritizing. So it's okay when you start small, for example, and prioritize by one metric on one page by using especially lab and field data, as Martin also showed us within the different tools. So pick, for example, a page with high traffic and or a conversion significant to deliver meaningful results. For example, this could be an ad landing page, conversion page, or a popular page on your site. Secondly, and this is one of the most important things, is that you really start properly planning testing, and A/B testing is here a good way to go. User server-side testing can avoid any rendering cost. So compare then also the results between the optimized and the unoptimized version. And third, but not last but not least, monitor. It's really, really important to monitor and to do it continuously. So this prevents regression. As we have seen in the slide also before, you see that field data, for example, can be used as a source of truth on how actually the user experience the website, as well as it can help you validate the optimization. So looking at the next example, we can really see how impactful A/B testing can be. Vodafone here started experimenting on how Core Web Vitals impact the user behavior on the lower funnel. This means closer to conversion. They conducted a server-side A/B testing on an important ads landing page, where users also could convert. So they built 2 versions of the landing page, which were functionally and visually exactly the same, except that version A was optimized for 31% better LCP. So that means its loading time was faster. This was achieved by a couple of changes. First, the server-side rendered, as we have heard before, which result to less render blocking JavaScript on the user side. And second, the most common one, they did optimize their images. Looking at the result on the right-hand side, we can see that they are pretty surprising. They saw 15% more users converting as a successful lead, following by 11% more user visiting the checkout funnel, and eventually 8% more sales. More information can be found also on the Google's web platform. So to sum it up, the path to good Core Web Vitals can vary from site to site, depending on where the user are in the performance journey and how complex the site design is. So it can really range from grabbing the low-hanging fruit and getting meaningful results to implementing complex solutions that fix challenging issues. So regardless of the amount of time spent, decision makers, so especially you, should treat this as a long-term investment into growth of business. because we believe that performance is a journey, not a destination. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dafina and Martin, for this deep dive into the Core Vital update and its combination with UX and SEO. We would now move over to the Q&A part. As already mentioned, we have also received some questions beforehand from the audience. However, there were also some questions which were added to the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. I would also encourage you guys, in case there are questions, that you add them now. But to answer the questions that have already been added to the Q&A section, I would like to quickly read them and then hand over to Martin and Dafina for answering them. One question from the audience was, the page speed inside tests of our website is not correctly displaying the first input delay metric. Why is this the case? Maybe a question to Martin.
Yes, so I don't know if it isn't displayed at all or not the right way. In general, it should be this way. So just try again, maybe with another page type as well. And if it then still is not displayed, we would have to ask Google, but for sure you can also use one of the other tests that we have provided, where you will find more answers to FID. Also, maybe start out with the Google Search Console.
I hope that will answer the question. The next question was, Lighthouse is complaining about unused JavaScript to reduce bytes consumed by the network, for example, with the Google Tag Manager. How shall we optimize a script which is coming from Google itself or another ad server?
So if I take this one over here as well, the first step could be to really kind of clean up your Google Tag Manager, that you get rid of the snippets you don't need. But I don't know if you're doing it already or not, but one point which would have a bigger impact is if you change to server-side tagging, and this can really help you out.
Thank you, Martin, for answering this question. There was just another one popping in. When applying changes on the website, how long does it take to show results for the Google ranking?
Here, I probably cannot give you the answer you want to hear, because it depends. It really depends on what are you actually optimizing, and the part you are optimizing, how big is the impact overall of your website for the rankings or the algorithm. So it can really, you can see results after 1 or 2 weeks, but it could also take 2 months, even if you're optimizing something that maybe didn't have that big of an impact or where it needs more time. So this really always depends on the status quo of your website right now and what you optimize, and the thing you optimize, how big the impact of that is in the algorithm.
Thank you, Martin. We just received a few more questions. This one is about the UX. How do you know which other UX considerations matter for a higher ranking on Google?
Well, despite the one that we have seen, of course, as we already said, it's also important to have a good on-page experience. So if you, for example, have also good content on your pages, and the content is really good structured, you will actually also have a higher ranking on the Google on Google or other actually search engines, because it matters also what search intent the user have. So if they are searching for a more informational content, then of course, if you can answer their questions with valuable content on the site, then Google will rank, of course, also your site a little bit better. So I hope this also helps you a little bit to find out how the coloration about the SEO and UX point is, because as I already said, both want to have to satisfy the user and show them actually meaningful and valuable content on the site. So does this answer? I hope this does answer the question.
Thank you, Dafina, for answering this question. There was a question from Falk about the cookie consent layers that one had to implement due to the GDPR or DSGVO in Europe affect the core web vitals respective page speed measured by Google in any way? And if yes, has the size of the layer any impact?
Okay, I can answer this one. It can definitely impact the input delay. So as we have seen before, and depending on it's actually depending on how the banner is rendered. So it will actually increase the page cumulative layout shift as well. As we know, you have to have the cookie banner on your site, but the suggestion here could be, for example, that you look on how scripts are loading on your site. For example, Chrome as a resource loading tool. I think you can see there exactly how this is impacting your site's overall loading time. So depending on where the scripts, for example, appears. So I also would suggest you here to have a conversation with your development team so that you can determine a better loading sequence that could reduce the, for example, the input delay there.
I hope this answered the question. If there's a follow-up question, please just use the chat. In the meantime, there were two more questions popping in. One is about the CMS. Are the common CMS ready for the core Web Vitals update?
In general, I'd say the common CMS don't have that much of an impact on the core Web Vitals, but it depends. For example, we have been talking about the images, right, which were one of the biggest pitfalls actually we see out there concerning loading speed. So there you could get better in terms of, for example, when the pictures are uploaded in the data bank or in the CMS, that it automatically gets to a better web format, image format, for example, WebP, or that it automatically gets reduced in the size and compressed, and that depending on if you're on a mobile device or on a desktop device, that it pulls the right image, the right size with the right dimensions. In those terms, I think there are actually a lot of CMS which could do better. But then in terms of other factors, it really depends on the CMS in the end, where we would have to check it in detail.
Thank you, Martin. There was another question a little bit about the difference of the B2B and B2C website. Would you say the Core Web Vitals update will impact B2B, for example, with a customer login and workbench area, in the same way as a B2C website?
That's a good question. And as we know, B2B and B2C are always a little bit different. But what I can say here is that regardless of which user you want to have on your website, it's still a user. So if you mainly want to be one of the best known B2B sites for the Core Web Vital, then of course you should look at the three main pillars, and then also try to improve there. So I would really recommend you to also look at the largest contentful paint, for example. So how fast is your site? How fast your site is, for example, delivering information, useful information, so that you really are aware of that. So I think this is probably the most common one. And of course, if you have then different different content on the site, because I know some of the B2B sites are very hard, very heavy, and because they have a lot of content on it with a lot of information. So this could also be a good way to look at the, for example, cumulative layout shifts, or also the first input delay, so that you really have your users that are coming on the website, which are also users that are customers for you in the first place. So yeah, definitely you should do that as well.
And maybe if I can add here one point, you were also mentioning the login. On a B2B side, you are working more with logins, maybe. So everything behind the login a bot or a crawler will not get to that part. So basically, this will not have an impact on the rankings. But however, of course, also their user experience is key. You want to be and have a user-friendly site also behind the login.
Thank you for that addition, Martin. I'm looking at the time. Basically, it's close to 12 o'clock, and I will briefly also make a wrap up of today's session. And yeah, what is basically key? What can we take away from today? So the Core Web Vital updates are to become the new core metrics when it comes to assessing the user experience of a website. This is good news, as page speed optimization has become quite confusing in recent years, with a wide variety of metrics from different Google and non-Google tools. The metrics that make up the Core Web Vitals will also evolve over time. So the current set focuses on 3 aspects of user experience: loading, interactivity, and visual stability. But we also expect more elements to be added later this year or next year. And although Google reprioritizes user friendliness with this update, this does not mean that the relevance and quality, of course, of the content of a website does not matter anymore. So you still have to do the keyword research and everything like as you did in the past, as these ranking factors still count in, of course. Currently, many websites, this is also what you have seen from the analysis from Susanne, many websites do not meet yet the new Core Web Vital requirements by Google. This can be seen, for example, if we look at the DACH e-commerce market, where currently only around 30% of all websites have good Core Web Vitals values. As a marketer, you can start checking the Core Web Vitals updates of your website in the Google Search Console, or with PageSpeed Insights, as we have seen previously by Martin, when he was talking about the different tools. If you do poorly there, you should take measures now so that your website ranking does not deteriorate after the update. Thank you very, very much attending our webinar today. And also thanks to our speakers, Susanne, Dafina, and Martin, and also to Lisa and Katja for the organization of this webinar. It was a great pleasure to conduct this webinar with you guys today, and we would be very happy also to receive feedback from you. In case you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email to communications@webrepublic.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. We wish you now all a great lunch, and see you soon again. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.